Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes. I would like to note we've muted everyone's line. If you could stay muted, and we'll discuss how you can get your questions asked and answered a little later on in the program. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll get started at about 4:02. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone, and happy Freedom Day. We're so excited to have you here to join us for this evening's Institute panel, marking Juneteenth, the ongoing quest for freedom in New Jersey. My name is Andrea McChristian, and I'm the Law and Policy Director at the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, also known as the Institute, and we're so happy to be here with you. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, we have placed everyone on mute just to make sure we can get through the program as effectively as possible. Please remain on mute, and in a second, I'll tell you how you can get your questions asked and answered. In addition, we're expecting a great group here as well. So to make sure you're able to see who is speaking, you can just switch to speaker view rather than gallery view if you're looking in Zoom. So for those who are new to the Institute's work, the Institute's a legal policy and advocacy organization based in the mighty city of Newark, New Jersey, that is doing racial and social justice around three interconnected pillar areas: economic justice, democracy and justice, and criminal justice reform. You can learn more about our organization at www.njisj.org. And tonight I'm honored to discuss on Emancipation Day, what is needed to make Black people truly free here in New Jersey and across the nation, with my fierce colleagues, Retha Onitiri, our Director of Community Engagement and manager of the 150 Years is Enough Youth Justice Campaign, Jayne Johnson, Senior Counsel in our Economic Justice Pillar, Greene, Associate Counsel in our Democracy and Justice Pillar, and Shepard, who heads up our Criminal Justice Reform Pillar of work. So before we begin the program, which will run for about an hour, I wanted to go over a few logistics. So as I mentioned, please remain on mute for the entirety of the program, but at the end, we will have time for audience Q&A. So as the program goes along, if you have any questions that arise, please make sure to type them into the Zoom chat feature or the Facebook Live feature, and we'll try to get through as many questions as possible. To go over the run of show, I want to start with some brief framing remarks, then turn it over to my amazing colleagues for some brief opening statements. I'll then have a few questions for each of our panelists before we'll open it up for Q&A. So with that, let's get started. Now, as I was thinking about how to shape my opening remarks for tonight's panel, one thought kept recurring within my mind. Black people have been given freedom, but they were never really made free. And as we celebrate the 155th anniversary of Juneteenth, the day, as we all know, in 1865, where Major General Gordon Granger proclaimed to enslaved Black people in Galveston, Texas, that they had been made free, over 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, We're celebrating this holiday at a sobering time for our country. We celebrate at a time where the recent deaths of Black people at the hands of police, from Breonna Taylor to George Floyd to Maurice Gordon right here in New Jersey, have amplified for far too long, for far too many Black people in this country. We have had freedom, but we haven't been made free. From slavery to sharecropping, to redlining, to over-policing, to mass incarceration, to voter suppression, to continuous generational resource divestment. Our country has put in place systems of structural racism that have consistently denied freedom to its Black citizens since well before the country's founding. Thus, in response, the national uprising that has occurred as a result of these harms has spoken not only to police abuses and police harms, but has exposed the need for this country to truly reckon with how its generational divestment in Black communities for over 400 years can and will no longer be tolerated. And while we watch as people of every race, color, and creed have taken to the streets in over 2,000 cities and towns across the country to call for an America where Black lives really do matter, we here in New Jersey must also take a cold, hard look at how our very own Garden State has played a devastating role in devaluing and divesting resources from its Black communities. Indeed, at the same time that Governor Murphy has publicly stated that Black lives matter, and that, I quote, "We will not accept systemic racism and bias as just part of our national condition," end quote, New Jersey continues to serve as home to some of the nation's worst racial disparities. For one, as my colleague Jayne Johnson will explain, New Jersey is home to one of the country's starkest racial wealth gaps. While a white family in New Jersey has a median net wealth of about $352,000, which is the highest in the nation, a Black family only has one of $6,100. Again, that's $352,000 for white families' median net wealth, compared to $6,100 for our state's Black families. What's more, as my colleague Retha Onitiri will address, we're also seeing that Black kids in New Jersey are not given the same opportunity to thrive as their white counterparts. This is so because here in New Jersey, a Black child is 21 times more likely to be locked up than a white child, giving us the highest Black to white youth incarceration disparity rate in the nation. We also have the fourth highest Latino to white youth incarceration disparity rate as well, right here in the Garden State. And as my colleague Shepard will explain, and as we're seeing across the nation, Black people in New Jersey are not free from police violence, with a Black New Jersey resident 3 times more likely to experience force from a police officer than their white peer. And lastly, as my colleague Greene will share, Black people in New Jersey are having their right to participate in the democratic process stripped away from them at disproportionate rates. Not only do Black people make up around 62% of incarcerated people denied the right to vote, while only representing 15% of the population, but 2 New Jersey cities, Newark and Jersey City, are the first and second in the nation for the percentage of Black people living in hard to count census areas, which we'll discuss more in a little bit. So as we sit with these disparities and realize that freedom has been delayed and denied to Black people in our state since they were first brought to the colony, what can be done? Well, at the Institute, we're dedicated to solutions. That's why we recently developed an action agenda called 10 Ways to Do Racial Justice Advocacy After You Say Black Lives Matter, available on our website at www.njisj.org/10-things. Each of tonight's panelists will speak to items in the agenda that all of you can take now to begin to make Black lives really matter in New Jersey, so that one day we can envision a state and a nation where Black people are finally free. And with that, I'm excited to turn it over to my dynamic colleagues for their opening statements. We'll begin with Shepard, the Institute's Criminal Justice Reform Director. Kira?
Thank you, Andrea. So as Andrea said, policing is a huge issue right now in our country, and rightly so. Over the last number of years, we have seen a surge in police killings that have been recorded. We know about the killing of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. One of his killers was a former police officer. And like Andrea said, Maurice Gordon. And we know about countless other folks that have been Black folks that have been killed by the police. And we know there's a lot of other Black folks over the years that have been killed by the police that we've never even heard about. And that's particularly sad. And when we look at what's happening right now, we shouldn't be surprised, because the history of policing can be traced back to the slave patrols. And this is when squadrons of white vigilantes will actually go out and basically enforce slavery laws during the time. So they would basically go out and abuse, sometimes kill Black folks, bring them back. Very similar to what's happening now. And here in New Jersey, as Andrea was saying, we have like a long, dark history of police brutality, excessive use of force. The Force Report, which was a 16-month-long investigation of police use of force across the state, found that, like Andrea said, Black people were 3 times more likely to have force used against them by the police. And in some municipalities, those numbers were particularly stark. So in Lakewood, Black folks are 22 times more likely to have force used against them. In South Orange, 10 times more likely. These are horrible numbers. And in Newark, New Jersey, where the Institute is actually housed, the Force Report found that a Black person was 133% more likely to have force used against them. This is very much in line with a Washington Post article that was out about a couple of months ago that said that in Newark, New Jersey, Black people are subjugated to frisks. 82% of the frisks are Black folks, are done to Black folks, and 77% of the rest are Black folks that are being arrested. And we know white folks are committing crimes too, right? So this doesn't just happen out of nowhere. And also in Newark, as I was saying, we have like a long history of police brutality and excessive use of force. Many of y'all probably know about the Newark Rebellion that happened in 1967. And the Newark Rebellion was catalyzed because of a violent police encounter against a Black Newark resident. And this rebellion was happening, similar rebellions were happening actually all across the nation in over a dozen cities. And these rebellions weren't just happening because of the police encounters, even though these police encounters were the trigger points. But like what's happening today, these rebellions were happening because of political oppression, social oppression, economic oppression. People was just like letting their rage be known. What happened in Newark at the time was that there was a Black cab driver, John Smith, who maneuvered his car around a double-parked police car, and the police took offense to it. Stopped them, pulled them out of the car, beat them, bloodied them up, brought them back to the precinct, beat them some more. So once the community got word of this, of course, they were outraged. They took to the streets, and we had a protest, and it lasted for several days in Newark. So what's happening now, as my mother said to me recently, is nothing new. But what is new is the number of people who are taking to the streets. I'm so excited about what's happening right now with the protests. And we're seeing people of every color out there, especially white folks. And for a long time, we haven't really seen that. So this is a real moment. This is a real moment for change. And everyone who really cares about justice needs to do all they can in this moment to seize this moment and bring about real change. So I'm just so happy to be here with my colleagues and be having this conversation with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kira. And just as a reminder, if people could stay on mute, just to make sure we can get through the program as effectively as possible. I'll now turn it over to my colleague, Jayne Johnson, Senior Counsel in our Economic Justice Pillar of Work. Jayne?
Thanks so much, Andrea. Thanks for those insights, Kira. Thank you to all who are joining us. I am so humbled to be on this team with such powerful leaders in this moment, led by our trailblazing CEO and President, Ryan P. Haygood. This moment really is surreal for me. I've never experienced a Juneteenth celebrated like this before. And as others have said over the course of several weeks, and as Kira really illustrated, this is a watershed moment in our nation's history. Andrea mentioned it's sobering that this moment has come due to the loss of life, due to bloodshed. Unfortunately, this has been our journey. James Weldon Johnson wrote, "We have come over a way that with tears has been watered, treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered." So we're here standing on the sacrifices of those who've gone before us. And the charge is for us to continue the work, to advance the work. And as Dr. Amelia Boynton Robinson, the courageous marcher on Bloody Sunday, said towards the end of her 104 years, "Get off my shoulders and do your own work. And that's what the Institute is doing. We're doing social justice, and it's an honor to do this work. It's empowering to take up the charge. And the reality of Juneteenth is that even when proclaimed after being denied for centuries, freedom and liberty was still delayed. And the harm caused by the denial and the delay of that liberty and that freedom has never been remedied. And this is the reality of Blacks in America, of Blacks in New Jersey. To this day, individual gains have not remedied the collective harm caused to our community. And so that is where our economic justice work is rooted. I want to shout out Dr. Laura Sullivan, the director of the Economic Justice Pillar, Tiara Moultrie, and the other members of our team. The economic justice work is aimed at toppling barriers that people of color face, Blacks particularly, in wealth building and gaining full participation in our economy, recognizing that these barriers were created by design and that equity will only come by tackling and redesigning these structures to allow all of New Jersey households to prosper. Our work targets several areas. Housing is central to addressing and promoting the economic mobility and reducing the racial wealth gap. Access to safe, quality, affordable housing should be a given in a prosperous state like New Jersey. But our latest report, entitled Erasing New Jersey's Red Lines, Reducing the Racial Wealth Gap Through Home Ownership and Investment in Communities of Color, outlines that access to wealth in New Jersey is defined by red lines. The report lays out the history of the racialized system in New Jersey that for generations intentionally failed to provide resources to New Jersey's Black communities and excluded them from numerous incentives, subsidies, and other supports available to build wealth. This system has created the dramatic racial disparities that Andrea mentioned and wealth with home ownership, and it's staggering. And our housing policies are at the center of that. Today, in response to the pandemic, we're seeing that the discussion in New Jersey is around protections for homeowners and mortgage forbearance. The efforts to keep people from foreclosure look very different than the protections for tenants to prevent eviction. Folks who need rental assistance have to enter a lottery system, but we're not lottering mortgage forbearance protections. So homeowner versus tenant are becoming code words, and that's a familiar tactic. Another example that these barriers are not a thing of the past and must be addressed through policy change. Addressing unemployment and focus on access to a living wage is another area of focus. And economic work has worked to craft access and expand access to job training and work that provides a living wage and creates career pathways. 5 bills are pending in the legislature right now in our state. Another 5 bills were signed into law, all based on policy recommendations outlined in the Institute's groundbreaking report. These laws create job training for middle skilled positions in high growth industries like technology, renewable energy, life science, for those underrepresented in these fields. And so, Andrea, I look forward to later discussing our work on how many who are joining us can advance our work to create a sea change.
Thank you, Jayne. I'll now turn it over to Retha Onitiri, our Community Engagement Director and Manager of our 150 Years is Enough campaign. Retha?
So thank you, Andrea, and good evening, everyone. As Andrea said, I lead the 150 Years is Enough campaign, which seeks to close youth prisons and reinvest funds into community-based solutions. Let me start by stating that I believe that youth justice is one of the most important racial justice issues in our state because it demonstrates both the need for urgent action and the possibility for radical transformative change. Today, as we commemorate Juneteenth, let us look at the fight for youth justice through a historical lens. The Institute and over 50 partners launched the 150 Years is Enough campaign on June 28, 2017, in front of the New Jersey Training School for Boys, also known as Jamesburg, which is the largest boys' prison in New Jersey. That date was significant because it marked the 100-year anniversary of Jamesburg, which opened on June 28, 1867, just a few years after Juneteenth and the end of slavery. That date was also significant because it formed a new kind of bondage. From the rise of Black codes, Jim Crow laws, segregation policies, and the war on drugs, Black kids have been over-policed and over-committed in our youth prisons. Today, as Andrea mentioned, a Black child is 21 times more likely to be detained or committed in our state than a white child is, even though they both commit most crimes at similar rates. Shamefully, again, Andrea mentioned this, New Jersey has the highest Black to white youth incarceration racial disparity rate in the country. The Garden State also has the 4th highest Latino to white youth incarceration disparity rate nationwide. And now, as we face the COVID-19 pandemic, a disproportionate number of Black kids are being impacted by the virus in our youth prisons. On top of the pandemic, we are fighting to stop construction of new prisons in our state. So just to wrap up, I would like to share a quote from my hero, Ella Baker, a fierce community organizer from the civil rights era. As she said, in order for us as oppressed people to become part of a society that is meaningful, the system under which we now exist has to be radically changed. It means facing a system that does not lend itself to our needs and devising means by which you change that system. So later in this conversation, I look forward to sharing means by which we can help radically transform New Jersey's youth justice system and invest in communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Retha. And last, I'll turn it to Aaron Greene, Associate Counsel in our Democracy and Justice Pillar. Aaron.
Thank you, Andrea. It's an honor to be before you today. I want to thank my colleagues at the Institute. And as I think about this day, Juneteenth, I'm reminded of the ancestors that paved the way for us to be here this day. I'm also reminded of my colleagues in the Democracy Justice Pillar, Hino Patel, Patricia Williamson, and Ron Pierce. We have a charge at the Institute that says from the ground up. And as we reflect on where we are today, we look at many successes that we've had in the past. We understand that they have started in the grassroots community, they've started in the Valley. And I think about Sojourner Truth this day. I think about Septima Clark, the grandmother of the Civil Rights Movement. And I think about Fannie Lou Hamer and Ella Baker, who were in New Jersey fighting for voting rights, fighting for them to be a part of this democracy. And I think about how that plays into our work at the Institute. As I reflect on the 1844 No More campaign, led by my colleagues Ron Pierce and Hino Patel, as they connected with incarcerated, formerly incarcerated, and citizens that were on probation to fight for their voting rights. They led a fearless campaign that led to the restoration of 83,000 people on parole probation having the right to vote. And as I'm reminded of that day when the bill was voted on in the Senate, my colleague Ron Pierce, who had his voting rights restored, he said, "This is not it. We're going to continue to fight for the restoration of those that are incarcerated." That's from the ground up. That's the work building on the legacy of those that have come before us. I think about our groundbreaking census work led by Patricia Williamson as we look at Jersey City, Newark, New Jersey, some of the areas where Black people live in hard to count areas and don't receive the funding or resources that they need based off the census count. She advocated fearlessly for resources and money to go to grassroots organizations to lead census work campaigns. And we're seeing the impact of that even during this time of COVID, where she's going and others are going to protest, going to other outreach activities to get people counted for the census. And lastly, a recent litigation victory that we were a part of with a number of our partners that my colleague Hino Patel worked very hard on, which looked at the recent election and saw how 10% of mail-in ballots were rejected, successfully filing litigation and leading to now having a public awareness campaign that will look to cure everyone's vote so that does not happen again, not only for the July primary, the general election, but going forward as we have this time of social distancing and COVID-19. Lastly, I just want to say from the ground up, as we reflect on that, we remind ourselves that we should not look for change to come from Washington, but we should look for change to start in our own communities in New Jersey. And I look forward to sharing more ways I can get involved with our democracy and justice work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aaron. At this point, I'd be remiss if I didn't note that those of you who want to learn more about the Institute can visit us at www.njisj.org. And if you feel compelled to donate to support our advocacy, you can do so at njisj.org/donate. Now, I'd like to turn to a deeper dive into the amazing work that each of my colleagues is working on. Again, all framed in the 10 things document agenda with action items that you can all have at your disposal both on the website, and I know we've shared it in the chat. Kira, I'd like to begin with a question for you. We're at a critical moment for racial and social justice in our state and in our nation. In the wake of the George Floyd murder and the national uprising it sparked, we're seeing a nationwide conversation around two different streams of thought on how we can move forward to ensure public safety. On one hand, some are calling for the need to reform and improve upon traditional policing. On the other hand, we're seeing others who are calling for the defunding of police and making meaningful investments in Black communities. Here in New Jersey, we are also watching closely the Attorney General's investigation of the recent shooting of Maurice Gordon by a state trooper. How do you think we should be thinking of public safety during this current moment? And what do you believe are the most pressing needs in the policing space to keep communities safe?
Thank you for the question, Andrea. I think we need to be looking at a number of different methods and strategies to reduce the footprint of policing in our communities, as well as to give our communities the resources they need to be safe outside of traditional policing methods. So one thing that we need to be doing is putting pressure on legislators to make sure that they're spending our tax dollars in a way that actually serve our communities. One thing we could do is make sure we're putting pressure on them to fund community-based alternatives to policing. And these alternatives have been around for a long time, but now, thankfully, we're hearing a lot about them. One such alternative is first responders being mental health professionals or social work professionals instead of police officers. So if someone calls 911 with a complaint, the first person that comes out wouldn't be someone who's armed unless the complaint was about someone having a deadly weapon. One place city that has been doing a great job with this is Eugene, Oregon, that has had a program called the Cahoots Program that's been around for like 31 years. And basically they take the police out of the equation when the person calls about someone having an issue with someone having mental health issues, homelessness, or substance abuse issues. So instead of an armed police officer in a uniform coming to respond to that call, you have someone in a hoodie who's unarmed, who comes with a van with a dove on it, responds to the call. So you can just imagine how that totally change the dynamics between the community members and first responders who are traditionally police. Another thing, alternative to policing that's been around forever, so restorative justice programs, been around since like the 70s. We're hearing a lot about them now. What restorative justice programs do is they bring the person who caused the harm, traditionally called the offender, the person who was harmed, as well as community members together in this holistic circle where everyone talks and figure out how the person who caused the harm should be accountable. Another thing is that we can do, as we said earlier, is just invest more money in our communities, more money in education, housing, jobs, mental health programs in our communities. And lastly, we really need to make sure we're scrutinizing police departments across the state to make sure that they're not putting money into militarization. And we're hearing a lot about that lately. So that's one thing we can do, is just make sure that we're putting money, make sure our tax dollars is really serving our communities. Another thing that we can do is to make sure that community voices are being centered in any police reform efforts that we're pushing. And we've been doing that here at the Institute. As I said before, the Institute is housed in Newark, New Jersey, and we've been working with the residents of Newark, New Jersey for a very long time to make sure they're part of the Newark Police Division's reform efforts. Dark history of police brutality in Newark, as I said before, decades after the Newark Rebellion in 2010, the ACLU New Jersey actually petitioned the district court to investigate the Newark Police Division because they said that they saw a pattern of unconstitutional policing practices. So the DOJ did that investigation. The findings came out in 2014, and what they found was that, yes, there was a pattern of unconstitutional practices. You had police using closed fist punches on residents, disproportionately Black residents, kicking residents, just using excessive use of force against residents. Because of this investigation, the Department of Justice and the City of Newark, New Jersey entered into a consent decree in 2016. So a consent decree is like a legally binding agreement that basically is aimed at and calls for police reforms. That same year, in 2016, the Department of Justice appointed a monitoring team of attorneys, former law enforcement officials, advocates to basically monitor and oversee the consent decree process. The Institute, we sit on that monitoring team, and Andrea McChristian and my colleague Brooke Lewis has been doing amazing work as part of that monitoring team. And over the last couple of years, we have been involved in the process of giving feedback and writing a number of different new policies for the Newark Police Division. And we are the lead subject matter experts for community engagement policies and the bias-free policing policies. And right now, we're at a really crucial moment in the whole consent decree process because we're entering the auditing phase. And this is where like the rubber hits the road in many ways, because we get to see if the Newark Police Division is actually using and implementing all the training that they've been going through over the last few years as part of the consent decree process. So far, only one audit has been done, and that's the body worn camera audit. And through that audit, we have found that the Newark Police Division is not in compliance as far as notifying residents that they're being filmed, and also was not in compliance as far as turning their body worn cameras on. And in July, we're going to be entering a phase for the community engagement auditing process, and that's going to be over in September. So this is an important time for community members to be making their voices heard, to learn more about the consent decree process. The process is not going to last forever. If after 2 consecutive years, if the Newark Police Division is found to be in substantial compliance, then the consent decree will be terminated. So this is the time to learn more about the process. You can go to the Independent Monitoring website and get feedback, read the quarterly reports. The 11th and 12th quarterly report was recently released, and that basically spans the time of the last 6 months of 2019. The 13th quarterly report was released very recently, like over the last 2 weeks. And the head of the monitoring team, Peter Harvey, recently did an interview with Michael Hill when he talked about the results of that particular quarterly report. So we believe in really centering the community's voice is very important, especially when we're talking about these reforms. And another thing that's really easy for folks to do right now is to really advocate and push for chokeholds to be banned and criminalized. Many of us in 2014 watched in agony when we saw Eric Gardner being put in a chokehold to the point where he died by a Staten Island police officer. And now finally, municipalities and states are doing something about the chokehold policy. So after George Floyd's killing in Minneapolis decided to ban chokeholds. New York has done the same thing. And we're hoping that New Jersey would do the same thing. And thankfully for us, just yesterday, a bill was introduced, Assembly Bill 4284 by Assemblyman Benji Wimberly, that basically criminalizes the use of chokeholds by law enforcement officers. and it categorized the use of chokeholds as a first offense, which is normally can lead to 20 years in prison or a fine of $200,000 or both. So there's things out there for folks to do. And yeah, I would tell everyone to find out more about everything I just said and to take action.
Thank you, Kira. The next question is for Jayne. Jayne, we're seeing in real time how an inability for Black communities to access safe and secure housing due to the intentional, systemic, and generational divestment of home ownership opportunities from them has led to the rampant spread of COVID-19 among the Black community in New Jersey and across the nation. Indeed, although Black people make up only 15% of New Jersey's population, they account for about 1 in 5 of all COVID-19 related deaths in the state. And beyond the current public health crisis, we're also aware that homeownership is a primary driver of the racial wealth gap, which are the numbers I just went over. Again, we know that this is a design system and not any indication of individual failures. Could you walk us through the sources of the housing disparity and the racial wealth gap we're seeing here in New Jersey and outline what we can do to ensure that every New Jersey resident has an opportunity to build wealth? And also, beyond housing, what more is needed to allow New Jersey's Black communities to not only survive, but to thrive?
Awesome question. Thanks so much, Andrea. You've given phenomenal guidance and tireless efforts to position the housing work for impact, so thank you. Your question underlines some issue that reminds me really of one of my favorite seniors. I love listening to seniors and getting firsthand accounts of their lives. I find that oral history just to be priceless, and I hope she's listening. Mrs. Greene is a retired Trenton public school teacher, and she shared with me a story of her family and her father that kind of underlines some of the issues that you raised. Her father shielded her and her siblings from the indignities of segregation, and he developed a courageous plan to offer his children a better way of life. But it required the difficult decision to relocate and abandon land he had labored for his entire life and eventually purchased. But there was no transfer of title, and a white family likely assumed the rights to that land. His heirs are still living, and this injury was not remedied. This is not from the distant past. This is current and a part of a pattern. This reflects the reporting from our housing report, Erasing New Jersey's Redlining, which identifies how systemic barriers have created the disparities we see today. The effect, as Nicole Hannah-Jones, author of the 1619 Project, describes, is of paddling against the current. That illustrates really the legal, the social, and the policy systems that you address that really are the source of these issues, not individual failures. And so when you're paddling against the current, you're pushed back due to no fault of your own. And despite your best efforts, it takes so much more effort to get a short distance than if you were boating with the current. And so that's the issue that Black people face in New Jersey and America. Wealth, unlike income, is a family's assets minus their debts. It's not what flows in and out like income, it's what the family keeps. And because inheritance impacts wealth, Black families, as illustrated by Mrs. Greene's story, are less likely to receive large inheritance. Even as earning gains are achieved and Blacks may even achieve more education, wealth remains consistently unattainable. In fact, studies have shown that Black households led by a college graduate, repeat that, Black households led by a college graduate have less wealth than white families headed by someone who didn't even complete high school. So even attaining more education alone and possibly earning more income in Black communities will not address the racial wealth gap. We can look further when we look at household wealth. Home equity is typically the largest component of household wealth. The impact of owning a home on a household's ability to accumulate wealth is significant. The average US homeowner has household wealth about $231,400, while the average renter has household wealth of $5,200. And so in New Jersey, home ownership breaks down by racial lines. Home ownership rate for white residents is about 77%, nearly 40 percentage points higher than the Black home ownership rate of about 41%. And so when we're talking about homeowner versus tenant, that's racialized. And so some of our work, even right now in this pandemic, and we'll really address some of that as we go on, but we're working in coalition with others to urge the legislature to protect tenants who are currently affected by the pandemic, so that after this moratorium and on lockout is over, that they will have protections. They have been affected like homeowners by this pandemic, and they need protections, and we're fighting for them. But when we look historically, as you mentioned, Andrea, racially restrictive covenants, exclusions from the GI Bill, redlining, predatory lending practices. These were all systemically denying opportunities for wealth building through home ownership in New Jersey. And so let's look a little bit, just bear with me, let's walk through this just a moment. When we look at Colonial New Jersey, just starting from our origins, land grants were given to English settlers who were coming in. 150 acres were given to those who brought a servant. In 1655, 60 additional acres were offered if bringing a servant or enslaved person under 14. And so our report, Erasing New Jersey's Red Lines, highlights that there was iterations of sharecropping in New Jersey called cottaging. Later, enforcement of racially restrictive covenants. Those are covenants which prohibit the purchase or lease or occupying a property by a certain group of people. Those covenants prevented Blacks from home ownership. And so local communities used those covenants to prevent Black people from moving in. Later on, we'll hear of Senator Booker's story of his family who was steered away from home ownership. So this is something that we have seen patterns of. Approximately 25,000 Blacks from New Jersey served in World War II, but few were afforded the state benefits that propelled other veterans into the burgeoning middle class. 100 quote unquote non-white veterans is reported that in New York and Northern New Jersey were offered mortgages, where over 67,000 were offered in the region, and only about 100 for those who were non-white were given. Redlining is an issue that is recurring. They began in the 1930s and lasted through the passage of the Fair Housing Act in 1968 officially, where the federal government used a process called redlining to draw red lines on maps around Black urban communities, designating them too risky or hazardous for federally insured mortgages. There's a substantial and lasting effect of that redlining today on urban communities. It has shaped our current segregation that we see and continues to lower home ownership rates and home values in these communities. In the Great Recession of 2007 and 2009, bringing it closer, we see subprime predatory lending offered in these same communities for families who may have been eligible for traditional mortgages. These subprime loans carried higher interest rates and fees and subjected families to default and in many cases foreclosure. And although New Jersey has protections to guard against this type of predatory lending, we see these practices were pervasive in New Jersey. These discriminatory lending practices have lasting wealth stripping effects in New Jersey's Black communities. So prior to the pandemic, we see this history of systemic discrimination, and we recognize that individuals alone cannot remove these barriers. This has to be done through policy change. And so I'm seeing in some of the chat, what can we do? Well, that question really can be answered by one of the bills that the Institute has helped to support, Senate Bill 322, Assembly Bill 711, which creates a task force to look and trace how Blacks in New Jersey have been denied access to wealth building, the reparations task force, which will identify remedies to repair these generational harms, and to help urge our legislators to find ways to remedy these through tax structures, through other investments into our communities. And so the task force will review and see what is the best strategy, how can this be done, and then offer recommendations to the governor. So we urge you to support Senate Bill 322, Assembly Bill 711, and encourage our legislators to move this legislation so that we can begin, and New Jersey can lead the nation really as the first state to begin addressing these generational harms. I saw Tom in the chat was asking about universal income or guaranteed income. Well, the Institute was on the Newark Guaranteed Income Task Force that was commissioned by the city of Newark to look into guaranteed income. And we are asking you to promote and push and advocate, urge your local officials to institute a guaranteed income program, a pilot even, in your local communities. Many of the communities that we're talking about that were affected by the Great Recession were shut out of recovery assistance from Superstorm Sandy, and now are more economically vulnerable to this current pandemic. We know that disasters and crises, whether economic downturns, natural disasters, or pandemics, reveal the cracks in our safety nets and foundation. And we're experiencing this during this current pandemic. These cracks create earthquakes in Black and other communities of color. Black people comprise a large portion of the essential frontline jobs that expose them to COVID-19. And our alarming wealth gap has been exacerbated by the pandemic. Folks who have lacked sufficient financial resources before the pandemic, now more than ever, the lack of savings and assets and generational wealth are making them more vulnerable to economic hardship. So Guaranteed Income Program can help create financial stability that's needed to weather this crisis and help these communities build towards economic mobility in the future. Guaranteed Income provides households with funds cash transfers to supplement their income while empowering them to provide for their basic necessities. Other pilots have been done across the country. We've seen it in Oakland and other places. And it shows that families largely use these funds for basic necessities like food and utilities. This income provides a source of security for these families who often have to make that agonizing choice of whether to put food on the table or keep the lights on when there's more month than money. So to ensure that New Jerseyans have the resources to weather this pandemic, we urge you to urge your local officials to create a guaranteed income program. Another way that you can take action is to urge the Department of Health to expand the release of local COVID-19 data based on race, ethnicity, and gender. The state responded to advocates and others, including the Institute, to adopt a law requiring this data to be published. New Jersey Department of Health now publishes this data, but we're asking for more local data from the municipal and county levels. It's beginning, we're seeing some of it, but we need to keep the urgency before the Department of Health to continue publishing this data and to make it more widespread. This helps us to identify where investments are needed to help rebuild our communities. So these are some of the ways that you can support our work to do social justice.
Thanks so much, Jayne. The next question is for Retha. Retha, we all know that New Jersey has one of the highest COVID-19 death rates in its adult prisons in the country. But what is less known is that the virus has also spread within our state's youth prisons. As of this week, 28 kids in New Jersey's youth facilities have tested positive for COVID-19. And with, as we mentioned, a Black child 21 times more likely to be locked up than their white peer, and our state having the 4th highest Latino to white youth incarceration disparity rate as well, we know that mostly our Black and brown kids are feeling the brunt of this pandemic behind our youth prison walls. And this moment is exposed why now more than ever we need to focus our efforts on closing New Jersey's failed youth prisons and investing in a community-based system of care for our young people. Why do you think this type of transformation is necessary, and what can people do to help support this work?
So Andrea, thank you so much for that question. And I am actually going to share a few slides to kind of to answer the question and to get my point across. So let me make sure I can do that. Okay, here we go. So Andrea, I'm hoping you can see my slides, correct?
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, so why transformation is needed. So we talked a little bit about the racial disparities, right? Andrea mentioned it, I mentioned it. A Black child is 21 times more likely to be detained than their white peer, and the Latino to white youth incarceration disparity rate is the 4th highest in the nation. But there are other really critical areas that I like to mention that really crystallize why a transformation is needed. So currently, we have very high costs to operate youth prisons. In 2020, the state plans to spend $300,000 to incarcerate one child in a state youth prison. $300,000. Can you imagine what we can do with that kind of money? We're planning to spend $56 million to operate 3 youth prisons that are not fully occupied. And prior to COVID-19, the state was planning to only spend $16 million for community programming. And so where we're putting our money is definitely not in communities, but into prisons that we believe are just not working. The other thing that I wanted to mention out is that people believe that putting young people in prisons will solve and make our communities safer. But what we're finding out is that that's just absolutely not true. We looked at 2014 data, and 377 young people were released. But what we found is that 76.9% had a new arrest. 58.9% of the young people had a new adjudication or a new conviction, and 23.9% were recommitted within 3 years of release. So looking at the data, looking at this horrible data, we believe that it is imperative that we have a transformation of the system here in New Jersey. So again, I mentioned that, we launched the 150 Years is Enough campaign about 3 years ago, actually next week. And there are some critical things that we're trying to do when we talk about transforming this broken system. First, we want to close youth prisons. We're really focusing on making sure that there are no new constructions. We understand that there may be some young people who may need to be in secure facilities, but we're really stressing that if there's a need to build anything, that what we need to do is repurpose or renovate existing properties instead of spending taxpayers' money on new construction. We're really focused on investing in the creation of interconnected community-based system of care. We're looking at really strengthening community engagement in our communities. As Kira mentioned, implementing restorative and transformative justice practices. That's really key for us. Reinvesting in comprehensive continuum of care is important. And absolutely, we need to make sure we look at policies and pass equitable policies that will benefit our communities. So since we launched our campaign, so what has happened, right? And so right after we launched the campaign, 6 months later, in January 2018, former Governor Chris Christie announced the closure of Jamesburg and Hayes. Hayes is our girls' youth prison. However, $162 million was appropriated to construct new facilities. And I've already mentioned that we are really looking to block that. We really are not looking to construct new prisons. And I'll talk a little bit about how you can help us work on stopping that. But in addition to that $162 million that was appropriated for building new facilities, there was a projection of $20 million in savings. I wanted to mention to you also, because what you're seeing now going on across the country and across the world is rebellions and people in the streets. And we found that we've been doing this for the last 3 years. And it's extremely important that people are engaged in these issues. Almost every time that we needed to get a message across that there needed to be change, we needed to make sure that people joined us in the street. So if you see the photo on the right, when we launched the campaign in front of Jamesburg, we actually were actually able to engage roughly 300 people to join us in front of Jamesburg to push for the closure of the youth prisons. So 300 people joined us, and if Jamesburg is in no man's land in New Jersey. So we were really happy that people got in their cars and got on their buses to come and join us. Right after Chris Christie made this announcement, of course, this was January 2018, he left office and Governor Phil Murphy actually was inaugurated into office. And right away, we asked for a task force to really plan and think about what a transformation should look like. And we wanted to make sure other voices were included in that discussion. We actually had to engage our community again in the October timeframe to really push for that transformation. And so you see on the right-hand side again, where young people were really joined us to send out a message that we want active participation by many voices in the task force and in this transformation. So, October of 2018, right around the time we had this engagement and this mobilization of the community, Governor Murphy issued Executive Order 42, which brought about the creation of the task force for the continuing transformation of youth justice in New Jersey. And I'll just tell you that the task force just finished its work today. Unfortunately, there was a delay in finishing up the recommendations and the report, but they finished up today, and hopefully you should see a report and recommendations soon. And we'll talk about the next steps after those recommendations come out.
And Retha, I know we're just running a little short on time. So if it's possible for you to highlight kind of the agenda items that people can, we can get to.
Sure. So there's actually two things that we really would like you to support. And one is that there is a bill that was introduced in May of last year and reintroduced to this year, and that is the New Jersey Youth Justice Transformation Act. And in that is sweeping legislation to transform the system, ending any talk of opening up new youth prisons. But in particular, we're looking to invest $100 million in communities. And so we're looking for folks in the community to support that. In addition, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a big effort to really release young people and adults, by the way, out of harm's way in adult and youth prisons. So last month, legislators introduced a new bill, and that is S25119, S2519 and A4235. That's the Public Health Emergency Credit Bill. This is for incarcerated adults and youth, where they can actually earn credits up to earn credits for the time they were incarcerated during the pandemic that will allow them to take up to 1 year off of their term so that they can be released early. So those are the two bills specifically that we're looking for people to support. And I think I'll wrap it up. Thank you.
Thank you, Retha. And Aaron, I know you're our last speaker. I don't want to give you short shrift, but I want to incorporate some of the questions that people have asked, because I know we're running up on 5 o'clock. There were questions, one around the settlement that just happened in the case that we've been litigating, like what exactly that means and what this case is about, and also why why is the census important?
Thank you, Andrea. For the first question, the case centered on the May 12th election that was specifically done vote by mail, where we had 10% of people that submitted vote by mail ballots had rejected. And most of that was due to signature match. So this litigation was filed, and now that we have a successful settlement, what's included in the settlement is that the state will engage in a public awareness campaign that will let people know about signature match, but also a cure letter. And what that means is that people that will have a problem of signature matching from specific departments, they'll send a letter to each of these voters, letting them know your signature did not match, but you have time to cure it, and you return that letter. So this time we have things in place where we won't have, hopefully, we won't have a 10% rejection in ballots. It's very important. We want everyone to be involved in this election. And we want everyone's word through the ballot. So it's the litigation is very important. And thank you again to my great colleague, Hino Patel, and a partner leading that litigation. In regards to the second question, the census, yes, the census is very, very, very important. $700 billion will be distributed across the country to state and local governments. This money will be used for school programs, summer programs, when it comes to infrastructure. And as mentioned before, Newark and Jersey City are first and second in the country where Black people live, the highest percentage of Black people living in hard to count areas. So what can we do to engage? What you can do is share information on social media. You can go to njisj.org/census2020, and you can download some of our materials and share those online. Great materials that were completed by Patricia Williamson, Laura, and Jake, that provide great detail of the census, the importance and ways to get people counted. Also, you can engage with protests and other gatherings going out in a safe manner under COVID-19 standards, but engaging, encouraging others to get counted. Also, you can pledge to take the census by texting pledge or CENSO, CENSO at 973-348-6688. That's 973-348-6688. And once you complete that, I am going to encourage everyone on right now to, after you complete the census, encourage 5 other people to complete the census. These are very important measures that we can take to engage with our community and to make sure that they're accounted to receive not only the financial resources, but the representation. As we know, the census plays a part in the electoral representation and our congressional representation. And in 2010, we lost actually congressional seats. So this is very important. And those are the things that I have to add on those questions. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you so much, Aaron. And thank you so much to my colleagues for those wonderful statements. I know we're hitting right at 5 o'clock. We could talk all night about this, but we did want to get to some of the questions that arose. So we'll go to 5:15 to make sure that we're able to hit as many questions as possible. So if you're able to stay with us for 15 more minutes, we'll try and get through everything. So as an initial matter, I saw people asking, where can you find the URLs? Where can you find the links, etc. So the 10 things agenda, which we sent out in the chat and is also available at njisj.org/10-things, has within it hyperlinks to our action center, which has phone to action tools for each of the bills we're promoting. We can click on it, email, call, text your legislator and Governor Murphy. In addition, if you want to go directly to the action center, you can go to njisj.org/action_center, and we'll also include that in the chat as well. So our action center has all our phone to action tools so you can advance these bills directly to your local legislator and the governor. And just one more plug also, if you are interested in supporting us, please feel free to do so at our donation page on our website. So a question has come up, and this one I'll direct to Jayne. Questions come up about universal basic income, guaranteed income. Why is it, what is it? Why is it important? Should that also be coupled with making sure people have access to quality jobs? Kind of will this program be feasible within New Jersey?
That's a great question. And, there are different variances of this program. What we're looking at in New Jersey is cash transfers that would be exempt from denying people benefits for public assistance and other resources that they're already receiving. So it would be in addition to anything that they're already receiving. It would be, right now, the Newark pilot would be for a certain period of time, for a designated period of time, for a designated number of families. And so we're really pushing for funding for this program and looking for support for that. If you need more information, we can definitely give that to you, but it's definitely looking to help create financial stability for families, and encouraging cash transfers to them to help support their economic mobility.
Great, thanks, Jayne. And this next question is for Retha. Retha, I know we weren't able to get through all your slides, but we know you mentioned that's $300,000 per kid to incarcerate each kid in a state youth prison. Is New Jersey making that same investment at the front end in programs and services? And is there anything you're currently working on that will make that investment real at the front end for our young people?
So thank you, Andrea, and that's a very good question. And unfortunately, the state is not making that same level of investment in programs that keep kids out of youth prisons. As I mentioned in my previous remarks, the state will spend about $56 million to operate 3 youth prisons. But prior to COVID-19, they were planning to spend $16 million on community programs. That's only 16. So of course, that's not acceptable. And so our big push is for more investment in communities, and that's gonna take all of us to do. And so I mentioned community engagement was critical. We're currently working on a toolkit for the community, a community engagement toolkit that will make recommendations on how the community can engage in restorative justice practices and things that we can do in our community in order to ensure that our young people get what they need in the community.
Great, thank you, Retha. So this next question for Kira. Kira, I know you spoke about the fact that the Institute is part of a comprehensive police reform effort within the consent decree process, overseeing reforms to Newark Police Division, while at the same time, we're also looking to alternatives to policing as advocated for in our agenda through demilitarization, focusing communities, reinvesting funds into communities rather than policing. Why in either the reform or the alternatives to policing movements, which we know are kind of two bodies of thought, why do you think it's so important to center community voice and input?
Yeah, I think it's great that the Institute has been really prioritizing centering the community's voice and input. And it's really important to center the Black community's voice and Brown community's voice, because many of those communities are over-policed. So they have a lot of encounters with the police. So they have a lot of insight into ways that the community and the police can be working better with community members to build trust. And also, we need to hear stories from the community. Stories impact policy and law and leads to change. I mean, as sad as George Floyd's situation was, as sad as what happened to Trayvon was, those are stories that went like across the world, and they are actually creating change. So we need to hear from community members who are having bad experience with the police. It's so important. In the interview that I mentioned earlier that Peter Harvey, who leads the monitoring team that he had with Michael Hill, he talked about the importance for the Newark Police Division to actually have youth councils. Like, we're trying to have them engage with youth more, because he was talking about how youth are having bad interactions with police, or if they're not at this point in their lives, they're going to grow up to be adults and they're going to be having interactions with police. So they need to build a relationship with the youth now, and we need to build a relationship with youth in Black and Brown communities. So it's so important to really listen to the community when we're talking about police reform, because those are the people in our community know what to do.
Thank you, Kira. And I think the last question will be for Aaron. Aaron, while obviously the Institute's work focuses on youth prisons, we do have coalition work making sure that the adult prison population is not left behind. I know we obviously have worked in coalition around the issue of releasing people from adult prisons due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but also we have impacted people's councils helped to be spearheaded by our colleague Ron Pierce, which are making sure that people who are currently behind adult prison walls have access to democracy. Could you speak more about the impact of people councils and why it's so important to have that coalition work? And also, just as a expansion of what you kind of hinted on before, the census. Why is it important? Why specifically for Black and Brown communities is it important to be counted? And we'll round out there.
Thank you, Andrea. Yes, the Impacted People's Council, led by Ron Pierce, incredible colleague, includes people that are formerly incarcerated, directly impacted. It aligns with that charge from the ground up. I've had the opportunity to sit on a number of these council meetings where a lot of things are discussed from the census, from getting people on parole, probation, the right to vote, also pushing forth legislation. And I think that it's vastly important to have that connection to those that are mostly impacted, because they have the best vision of how to go forward, the best vision in regards to achieving the injustices, achieving justice for the harms that they face. So I encourage everyone to support our efforts. More importantly, also support my colleague Ron Pierce. What he's doing now is going to not only transform things in New Jersey, I believe they will have an impact across this country for what they're doing. In regards to the census, I want to reiterate again that due to COVID-19, the self-response deadline has been moved to October 31st. But we encourage you to respond right now. Don't wait until the deadline. Encourage others to respond because if we don't have the necessary count, that means that it will impact funding, impact representation. So I just want to reiterate, share things on social media, Do the pledge, text, share that with others. And more importantly, if you can encourage 5 people, everyone on here, please, if you can encourage, if we get off, text 5 people and ask them, have they completed the census? And after you tell them to tell another 5 people to do the same. Thank you.
Great. And so with that, thank you so much for joining us. 3 last things. If you had a lingering question that didn't get answered, please feel free to reach out to us at justice@njisj.org. I will repeat, we have our new 10 things agenda document available at www.njisj.org/10-things that we'd love for you to take away, to share, to download, so that people, when they ask what they can do, there's an easy 10 things item that they're able to do. And again, if you felt led to support us in our work to do social justice at the Institute, feel free to show your support at njisj.org/donate. Every dollar, every cent will really help us to do social justice advocacy and racial justice work here in New Jersey, to make sure that all Black lives really matter and that all Black people can finally be free. Again, thank you all so much for joining us. Please stay safe. Please stay secure during this critical moment, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you.